So there's one hot topic that's been popping up in several threads about Frosthaven. Is it too hard? It hasn't popped up one or twice, but several people have commented on either, character power or scenario difficulty and so on and so forth. And I find it interesting because some people also make claims on how much success they've had in Gloomhaven as well. Some people claiming like being able to beat all the scenarios on scenario level 7. Some people say like they've played the Gloomhaven digital and beaten it 10 times, and etc, etc. And I've always found it interesting. So what is going to determine success in Frosthaven? Because there's absolutely groups who like struggled with Forgotten Circles. There's some groups that struggled with Crimson Scales, and that started to come around. All these things, how do you go from A to B with some success? And of course, there's a few things. First off, Gloomhaven and Frosthaven are not the same product. There's definitely different design when it comes to balance over items, scenarios. The monsters themselves have been changed, as well as introduced some new ones, as well as the characters. So we're going to break down why some groups have found Frosthaven to be that much more difficult, and of course, what you can do better to reduce those losses. As per usual, if you enjoyed the content, please hit like. It does really help. Be sure to subscribe, and we have a Patreon and a Discord if you want to help support us. It really does help. A lot of groups, when they first got into Gloomhaven, the common story, just running into the Black Barrow and failing. As a matter of fact, even in a poll, despite the fact that a lot of people don't consider the Black Barrow to be that hard, it's also considered to be one of the hardest scenarios, not necessarily because the Black Barrow is inherently hard, but because you're also trying to learn the game at the same time. So playing just a regular old scenario while also like, how does this character work? How do monsters work? What are bandit guards and archers? How does this even work? It becomes overwhelming, and a lot of groups just lost the Black Barrow, if only because there's just a lot to take in. But eventually people learned concepts of like initiative weaving, realizing how powerful stamina potions are, got more familiar with their classes, and began to get through the campaign. Eventually people started to realize how powerful like hard crowd control is, or some of the more powerful classes that I'm not going to pick out, but there's like 3 that are just completely bonkers. So here's something that's interesting. If you avoid some of these most broken items and broken characters, like specifically stamina potion and any adjacent items that allow you to recover certain things, and there's a lot of course non-lost stun capacities, could you still beat Gloomhaven? And the answer is, of course, you can. You don't actually need those super powerful things, but it does make it easier. And it does definitely make like scenario level 7 to be notable. Actually, towards the end, we were playing scenario difficulty 6 and 7, and I don't consider my group overall to be necessarily the most competent group ever. So I don't even think you need a significant amount of like proficiency to actually have success with that once you've hit like prosperity level 7 and unlocked the big classes. So what really determines that, and how did some people jump into Forgotten Circles and then fall flat? Now, Forgotten Circles definitely has different scenario design, and so let's first off talk about scenario design. Frosthaven scenario design has significantly less just kill all the enemies scenarios. Sometimes there's like kill all the enemies but destroy this altar first. Kill all the enemies but then there's a boss you have to deal with. There's some variations, but unlike Gloomhaven, which had like 70% just kill everything, Frosthaven has a little bit more of a twist to most of the scenarios. And it's actually really nice, but some of them get pretty far out there. Some of them that are like, you have to move over to the specific thing, and then every round put a marker up until the marker hits a certain number, and then the scenario is over, during which you have to, on alternating rounds, create spawning. There's definitely some scenarios that just have a lot going on, and you're like, well, I have to play my class differently, and that's not necessarily the worst. How do you adapt to a situation where the scenario where your ability to just, I can blow up this one room? What if there is one room and it's not blow upable? Like, how do you approach it then? The scenarios just make you think differently. And some people just found one strategy that worked, rinsed and repeated. So then once you take that away, all of a sudden it's like, how do we play the game again? And those things, it's basically we just relied on crutches. And that's okay to have like, hey, I found this really broken combo. But once you can apply that broken thing to every scenario and just speed run it, and I know like there's a bunch of people, and it's usually something adjacent to like the Cragheart's Unstable Upheaval, where you could attack every adjacent, but then everyone within range 2. You could pair it, because it's initiative so early, pair it with your other thing and just get very reliably attack 5+ stun in a giant hex area. And that's just with level 1 Cragheart cards, not even including some of the more higher damage potential items you can have in some of the locked classes. For some scenarios that doesn't have like, hey, I'm going to get in the middle of this room, blow this up at initiative 13, then everything else should be pretty hurt at that point. So if we take that tool away, if some scenarios are designed that they're not necessarily allowing that, or you like have to realize, hey, that obstacle needs to be destroyed, or hey, we need to like keep this person alive, and Gloomhaven did have a few of those we must keep this person alive quests. And I know some people in particular, there's one scenario that I know people are thinking of, like, I fucking hate that. And yeah, that one was pretty brutal, not gonna lie. So that was definitely up on the harder things, but there's more to it than the scenario design. But basically being able to look at the tools in your class and stick to like the cards you have and saying, how can I complete the scenario? And I think a lot of people also, scenario design kind of makes you rethink strategy a little bit, because I've heard quite a few people who, especially when I like give guides, who are saying, tell me what cards to pick and lose once I get to level 2 and higher. And you know, that's cool, but I always try to encourage, use a pool of cards. Don't limit yourself to like, this replaces this once you get to this level. That is foolish thinking, especially in Frosthaven. Hey, I took Head of the Hammer, and now I have Air Generation, so I can drop Javelin. But Javelin's one of your best ranged attacks. What does the scenario require? Bring what the scenario requires. And I think that'll go a long way. I was actually talking to 2 people of a group that I only met last year. We play separately, but they're not actually struggling that much. But I found out they also stick to the general idea of, this is not your hand. Play with all the cards and change it up every scenario. And just getting in the habit of reevaluating every scenario, I think has contributed to the fact that they haven't failed the mission in Frosthaven. And I think that goes a long way. And the card design is just so different in Frosthaven. So let's actually talk about character card design now. So one thing I do think is cool, a lot of people, when they busted open Gloomhaven and then started unlocking the locked classes, were like, hey, these locked classes are just really powerful. And the answer is, yeah, they are. Overall, the balance curve has kind of shifted towards this thing. I know I've done tier lists on Gloomhaven a bit, but Frosthaven doesn't have as much variance. I think you could do kind of a tier list based off of how adaptable they are to scenarios, because some classes can fit and like play into a lot of scenarios very well, and some are more prone to, oh no, there's retaliate or something, any number of mechanics that could potentially screw them over. But overall, the balance, there's like no like loot one and then do nothing else. Like some of the weakest cards on Frosthaven is like move one, loot one out of the loots. Almost all the loot cards in Frosthaven actually do something else. But that's not necessarily part of success in Frosthaven, but you need to loot a lot. But all the loot cards are just better. But overall, the power of cards raised a bit. But there aren't as many of those like, wow, that card is broken and game breaking. There are no, the game is broken. How is this card so powerful? None of those cards anymore, but the average card's better. Like just looking at the Banner Spear and how many of those cards are just non-losses, and like comparing it to the Brute, the Banner Spear clearly just destroys the Brute in balance. It's, except for like, you know, Balanced Measure, it destroys balance. Balanced Measure clearly has some capacity to be incredibly powerful, and Provoking Roar. So you have like 2 cards that you can potentially asterisk, although Provoking Roar is just good on its own, period. Banner Spear's stuff is just ahead of the curve when it comes to the Brute. It's just better, but why is that? The Brute's a little undertuned over on almost all of their cards, and the Frosthaven, we sought to like raise the floor of character balance. But imagine if we said like, hey, you know what, congratulations, you need to repair this thing, here's a fun new toolkit, and you only used the tools that you were used to and didn't adapt to the fact you had this new toolkit. Using the same tactics won't necessarily work. So you see something that does have a large amount of health. Maybe you can't do the instant kill stuff or like, hey, I'm going to do this, blah, 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 and then boom. And then they're going to stun them repeatedly. So maybe you need to be like, all right, I'm going to wound them, and then because they have a lower move, we're going to move away, and maybe we'll like create an obstacle or trap or drop a summon, and then buy us time that the wound's actually going to tick, finish off the things. Just try to be more creative with the things, especially initiative dancing. I actually saw a couple streams, and I don't want to call them out because that's just mean. But there's some people who had claimed that they'd beaten Gloomhaven, which is fine, wonderful. But they then they just stopped doing initiative weaving and just like going early in Frosthaven, which is definitely a sign of I'm used to all these big items and these powerful cards that are like, hey, let's target 7 hexes non-loss, dump all the items in it, and then not having that payoff in Frosthaven, I think, has been a big deal. I do think, however, the card balance is nice because we have a better toolkit. The Banner Spear has like disarms and immobilize and wounds and long movement, as well as ranged and melee and summons. Then you have the Bone Shaper, who does have like melee and range and curses and like a very diverse array of tools in her toolkit. The Drifter doesn't have a lot of crowd control, but can literally do anything you need. The Deathwalker has a viable melee and range build, and it does have support cards if you happen to like not bring like a Drifter or a Banner Spear in your party. There's just so many options in every class that you have the ability to fill some roles in some limited capacity. So look at what your group makeup is and try to make sure you have what your group needs. And yeah, so you may not be having non-loss stuns at level 1, but you shouldn't need non-loss stuns to be able to complete these scenarios. Item design. So no longer do we have those incredibly powerful stamina potions, although stamina potions can actually be unlocked pretty early, and I won't tell you the exact combination to get them. You'll find out on your own. They're clearly nerfed. It was shown in the Kickstarter that no longer do they recover level 2 or higher cards. As a matter of fact, if you played them with the nerfed version, back in the and you were 2-player, you're almost back to where you were, just level 1 cards. Especially once you hit to level 2 is the only time you'll actually notice a difference. This is important though, because like once you hit to like level 5, 6, and being able to like during a rest cycle play your like level 5 or 6 or higher card twice, and being able to do that once a scenario was huge. Getting back a level 1 card is still strong. It's actually still a strong card, but making it unrecoverable and only level 1 cards and only 2 copies of it, I think really does bring its power down to the point where it's good. I mean, I'm actually using it right now in my main campaign. I've been using it the entire character thing. The nerfed version, just recovering level 1 cards, and it's been fantastic. So even with all those nerfs, it's great. So all this kind of comes with a reshape in strategy. But a lot of people who did do the good back to basics thing in that they got used to in Gloomhaven and just pick those skills up in Frosthaven, I think had the least amount of struggles in Frosthaven. I do think that the scenarios are notably more complex on the whole, and some of them are designed in a way that you have to play a little bit outside the box. And some of those are less fun. There's actually one scenario in mind that I do agree we all had to play differently, and I don't actually think it was that fun of a scenario. But I do think all the other scenarios that we played have actually been enjoyable so far, even though some of them were like, crap, I have to do this different. My class is not necessarily great at this, but I am the one in the position to be able to do this. And honestly, just being able to get successes despite that, and I know that I've played quite a few. I have proficiency with the classes, so not being surprised at any of the class unlocks and having some proficiency before is definitely a leg up here, but also playing with people who haven't seen those classes, and I haven't seen almost all the scenarios. As a matter of fact, I did mostly character balance stuff, and I hardly did any scenario balance. As a matter of fact, I think we tested 9% of the Frosthaven scenarios. Of those, I've only played 3 of them so far, so but I'm really happy that the way it's turned out. I think that overall, getting used to being adaptive, getting used to what tools your characters have, and being able to use them effectively, and coordinate with your party. You're allowed to talk about, hey, is anyone bringing a heal to a scenario? You don't have to hide what cards you're bringing, just the cards you're bringing that you're playing that round. But otherwise, beforehand, act as a group. You win and lose as a team. Just rely more on teamwork. It'll go such a long distance into ensuring your success. But what will scenario design and character design be going forward? Personally, I do think that the Frosthaven balance of what they've determined, this is a balanced character, I believe that is going to be the golden standard. I think we're going to be looking at that, of course, that card format, and I think that this is kind of the character balance we are aiming for overall when we're designing classes. But scenario design, I think, will vary. I think if they do introduce like a Jaws of the Lion, but it's cold, I think they might dial the complexity down to be able to introduce new players, or who knows? I don't have real, this is all speculation at this point. I do think that the scenario complexity will obviously be very variable in Haven games going forward, but I do think that character design is going to be roughly about where it is now, as well as item design. So those are things you should get used to, but especially if you're going to be playing future Haven products, of which I'm very excited for, but obviously I need to finish my Frosthaven campaign. Speaking of Frosthaven campaign, I do have an extra box. I do have to get like extra webcam or two just to do it, but it does seem that there is some request to stream Frosthaven, and I might do a Let's Play Frosthaven solo mode where I just set up the things on my desk, and I'll have a little bird's eye view over here where you can see the whole thing, and I'll play through it with 2 or 3 characters. So if that's something you're interested in, please help support us on Patreon so I can help cover the costs of like upgrading some equipment. That would help immensely. But it is something I'm considering, and it does seem like there's some interest in that. So thanks for all for that. And I hope all of you enjoyed watching the video. I know this was more of a thought piece instead of a guide, but it is definitely something that's crossed my mind from going through lots of threads on, especially like Board Game Geek or Facebook and Reddit, and that's been, I spend a little bit of time lurking on there. I haven't been posting as much recently, but you know, life happens. But like, tell me about your campaign. Have you had struggles? If so, like, what scenarios have you struggled with, and do you think that they are fair scenario design? If the classes don't feel balanced, which ones do you feel could use some adjustments? Just let me know in the comments. It's really cool. Plus, I really enjoy talking to the community. So in addition to thanking all of you for being amazing, thanks to our patrons. You guys are really wonderful. The Inox tier patrons, thanks. Some of you have been supporting for quite some time, and I just love it. It's so helpful. All of this is going to my bottom surgery fund, so if you actually want to help contribute to that, I'll have a link to that in the description as well, but I'll have a link to the Patreon. I do post updates, so if you want to know what guides coming up next, I will put those on there as well. So thanks to you patrons, you're amazing, and thanks all of you for watching.